Hello and welcome to everybody. Is it Giuseppe? We can start now?
Yes, hello everyone. We can start now.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So welcome to everybody. The TIC Council and Cotecna are very pleased to have you here with us to share some experiences on remote activities. We have a very short hour, so I will be brief. We will start our program with an overview of the TIC Council paper that was published a few months ago, and that presentation will be made by Pia Katroffer from TUV Ryland, who was a major contributor to the development of the paper. Then Kamlesh Parmar from Cotecna will talk about Cotecna's increasing use of remote activities and provide some facts and figures. Finally, Imran Sayed, also from Cotecna, will address some technology issues related to remote activities. We will end the program with some questions and answers that will be hopefully address the questions that were sent in before the webinar and perhaps some that may be arriving during the program. Without any further delay, as I say, we have a short hour, so we have no time to waste. Let's welcome Pia for her presentation on the TIC Council paper.
Yeah, thank you very much, Iliana. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I work for TÜV Rheinland since 1st March 2013 as Regulatory Affairs Manager, and thus I'm dealing with legislative and normative revisions and regulatory issues and interpretations. So please move ahead, Giuseppe. Well, so just mentioned from Iliana, we worked on this guideline last year for about 6 months. And the objective of this guideline had been to provide guidance on several stakeholders to use the remote conformity assessment activities. So in our paper, we considered also the possibilities and limitations of remote conformity assessment activities. And one of the very important topics had been to strengthen the confidence in the use of these remote activities and to contribute to a better understanding and consistent application. So to create trust in using remote techniques. Please, the next slide. Well, what's the scope of the paper? The paper covers the application of different remote activities, so not only audits, but also inspections. And yeah, the point is that those activities or conformity assessment activities are based on regulations or also on different procedure standards, and might include certification of products, so management systems, processes, service, and so on. Next slide, please. Well, it is true that the pandemic significantly accelerated the use of remote activities. But we do not forget that already in specific situations we used already remote techniques such as for wind turbines and underwater cables, for example. Nevertheless, there are other situations which require the use of remote activities. So let us think on natural disasters or wars, which we had currently, unfortunately. And so remote activities can gain in importance by considering them to enhance sustainability. Next slide, please. Well, we considered in our paper so-called key parameters for decision. All these points are listed here on this slide. I just would like to focus on one or two, which are very important in my opinion. So first one is certainly integrity, efficiency, effectiveness, and impartiality of the process. Also, the safety of people involved in the activity is a very important key parameter. Another one which is very important is to ensure equivalency with on-site assessments. So I would like to underline in particular this point, because sometimes people may think that there is a difference between on-site and off-site assessments. No, that isn't. And what is also very important is that we have a specific level of confidence in the process. Otherwise, this is, let me say, like a limiting factor. Yes, next slide, please. Well, there are other parameters to consider for a decision. Such as scheme owner or regulator determine the specific criteria serving for judging equivalency and acceptance, or the understanding and cooperation by the customer. And all these principles are valid not only for off-site remote activities, but also for hybrid situations. Next slide, please. So we have also considered in our paper limiting factors which need to be considered. These are in particular legislative and regulatory provisions. Then also new client or a new product type. This could also mean that we cannot do such a remote activity. That there are specific characteristics which cannot be assessed without human senses. Smell, or that something need to be touched. So next slide, please. Another point which is very significant is the assessment of risk. So what is very important for us is that conducting a remote activity should be based on a risk-based approach. The relevant risks are those related to the key parameters, which I already mentioned, and must focus on also on additional risks that perhaps a non-conformity cannot be detected. So due to incomplete information during a remote activity, that's also a very important point. And another point is safety of people. So we have considered this assessment of risk and how to approach in our paper. Next slide, please. Well, so technical and process issues. It is clear that the guideline referred to a clear description of the remote activity is necessary. That the requirements can be processed together with the different steps. So the technical functioning of the infrastructure is very significant. So if we have not an internet or a good internet, so then such a remote activity is not possible. And therefore, we need to ensure a proper preparation and a planning of the remote activities. So perhaps you might have the impression that a remote activity requires less resources. No, that's not the case. So sometimes it might be necessary to have a higher level for the preparation and the planning. And very important is also to have a clear information. Yeah, and that's in particular necessary for all those participating in such an activity. So personal training and qualifications for the new tasks needs to be considered. And what is also a very relevant point is that the accreditation body has to accept the use of remote conformity assessment activities. Next slide, please. Well, certainly remote activities provide an added value because we can have the availability of specialized expertise. We can certainly save travel related expenses. Nevertheless, this doesn't mean that this costs less because, as I already mentioned, so we need to focus more on the preparation and the different steps. Then it helps certainly that business can continue. We have already seen this during the pandemic situation. And what's easier is the recording, securing, and transmission of data. But nevertheless, information need to be verifiable. Yeah, please go ahead. Well, by summarizing the point is, in our opinion, in future, we will do such practices, so with remote activities, that's sure. Nevertheless, the objectives and the requirements remain the same, whether we are on site to assess products and services and equipment, or we are doing those remotely or by hybrid situations. The outcome is always the same. So there is no difference between these different approaches. So therefore, such remote activities need to be done with great care, as already mentioned. So by preparing and processing every step. And the decisions are based on feasibility, acceptability, and in particular on risk. And it should maintain transparency. Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pia. In my rush to begin the session earlier today, I failed to introduce myself, so I apologize for that. I am Ileana Martinez. I'm with the TIC Council, and my position is Trade and Accreditation Director, and I will be attempting to moderate the session today. I think that Pia's summary of our paper was very clear, and I hope it has answered some of the questions that were sent in earlier. One thing I do want to emphasize again is that we have called our paper, we refer to remote activities. And for that, what we're trying to convey is that it covers the whole range of conformity assessment activities. It covers certification of products, management systems, persons, services. It also covers inspection, testing, verification, and validation, and any other activity that could be considered conformity assessment. That's why we're using this term of activities, is so that we don't constrain our guidelines to one type of remote audits or inspection, which sometimes is referred to more often than with a more comprehensive impression. Again, thank you, Pia, for that, and we'll pass on then to the next presentation, which is from Kamlesh. Kamlesh, I'm sorry if I mispronounced it.
No, that's absolutely right.
Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I hope I'm clear. You're able to hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. My name is Kamlesh Parmar. I am the Director for VOC and Commodities and have been working with Cotecna for past 8 years. I am also the Product Certification Manager, managing 17065 accreditation for the region. First of all, I would like to thank TIC Council, Eliana, Pia, and team for the fantastic work you have done in creating this paper on remote activities of conformity assessment. My references for today would be coming from a lot of things which you have published in your paper, and I'm honored to join today's call. In today's world, we have witnessed clients and a lot of regulatory agencies. They are under mounting pressure to improve performance and make timely decisions to facilitate trade activities. This goal has increasingly become challenging during the pandemic and increasing public expectations, and more recently, the political pressure which we have witnessed. The introduction and adoption of remote assessment activities during the pandemic is an example of regulators demonstrating resilience and agility in the face of the crisis. A lot of agencies, including IAF, have published certain publications and guides for conducting remote assessment activities. Some of them, they are pertaining to specific scope, while some of them are for a particular standard. We can refer to the principle on remote assessment, which was published in 2015, also known as ID 12:2015. ISO 19011:2018 published guidelines for auditing management system, and now it includes the specifications of conducting remote activities. And recently, in pandemic, in April 2020, we also saw ISO 9001 auditing practices, which allows remote activities. We have learned that in order for business continuity and not disrupting the trade flows, we need to be quick enough, we need to be adaptive, and we need to move along the risk and the crisis which are being shown in the market. When we started developing remote inspections many years back, we would often use portals and commonly available platforms which supported video conferencing facility and remote access to certain electronic systems. Many agencies and conformity bodies, including Cotecna, over the years, have introduced use of various tools, including WebEx, on which we are having our discussion now. We also used, some of us, we are using Zoom, Microsoft Teams, and then there are certain tools which are developed indigenously by each organization, as well as there are certain third-party applications which are available as plug and play. But all of these, they permit us to integrate file sharing, conducting interviews via video conferencing, and online chat between CVs and the host into a single platform. Let's move on to the next slide, please. So I would be talking about the increase of remote activities within the TIC industry. But just to give you an example, within Cotecna, we are performing almost 30% of our inspections remotely for VOC or CBCA, which is also known as verification of conformity or consignment-based conformity assessment programs. Now that's a very good percentage, and in fact, in the pandemic period, it was more. And I believe the industry standards are on a higher side. Within the remote assessment activities, we are also conducting remote audits. In remote audits, it is always divided into two phases, the pre-audit and the main audit phase. During the pre-audit phase, the inspector or the auditor is requesting for a lot of quality documents, and we are ensuring that the proper IT infrastructure is available to conduct the audit during the main phase. But it actually gives an overview for the inspector to identify the target areas that they would like to focus during the remote audit. Talking about the benefits, we have geographical accessibility. You would be amazed to know that 1/5 of the time is spent by inspectors on road. In some days, inspector might even spend more, depending on what kind of location and how remote it is located. This causes certain inefficiency, of course, and also it opens up your inspector to certain dangers like roadway accidents. And when when you conduct remote assessment activities, you are actually reducing your travel time, but also you are keeping it a little safe for your team. At the same time, the inspector or the auditor or any other person conducting the remote activity, he or she is safely able to observe objects and materials from a distance when the objects are inaccessible or in dangerous environments. When we talk about sustainability, and there's a fact, according to EPA, which is United States Environmental Protection Agency, a typical vehicle is emitting 4.6 metric tons of carbon dioxide each year. So when you're conducting remote assessment activities, you're actually reducing your carbon footprint thanks to the reduced mileage in travel, whether it is by car, whether it is by train, or whether it is by flight. There is less pollution, and also somewhere the car maintenance cost is getting reduced. So it's all in all, it's very sustainable. In terms of health and safety, you are ensuring the people involved in remote assessment activities, we are not exposing them to certain infectious disease like COVID, or let them go for certain sites which have hazards or restrictions. So you are not spreading the disease. At the same time, you are not exposing your staff to these kind of infections. In terms of cost management, when we talk about management system audits, it requires specialized expertise to conduct the audits. And in certain cases, these audits, they have to travel. It's a cross-boundary, cross-country travel, which might include flight tickets. It also includes hotel stays. But now, because of the pandemic, we had witnessed that people have started conducting even management system audits in certain countries, not everywhere, but certain countries. Now, this reduces the cost. And within the industry, I have also witnessed where the cost has reduced for traveling, and the same benefit is getting passed on to the client. So it's a win-win situation for the client as well as for the conformity body. On the similar aspect, when you are working remotely, you are hiring and you are using the talent globally while mitigating immigration issues. And within Cotecna, we have enjoyed productivity gains when we have conducted remote assessment activities. There was an increase of 15% more productivity for certain remote assessment activities conducted in certain countries. In terms of innovation and competition, not everything can be conducted remotely, but whatever is qualified, it actually gives an indication that you are going to improve your audit evidence trail with real and indisputable footage of the vendor, the process, the interview, the equipment, and also the results. Today, my colleague is going to speak about the technology, so I'm not going to go in detail, but just to let you know, today the technology has made it possible to have certain aspects of geotagging, inspection, location. You can also live stream high definition, videos, images. Also OCR, which is optical character recognition. It helps the system on its own to read the packing list, read certain text. So I think a lot has been benefited as the technology has evolved because of the push for remote assessment activities. Certain remote activities are actually more effective thanks to one virtual workspace with all the necessary documents. COVID-19 has acted as a catalyst to further amplify conducting remote assessment activities. And that's all for the slide. Let's move on to the next slide, please. All right. So in terms of advantages, I have covered a lot in the benefits. And in terms of limitation, even I have limitation of time. So I'm going to move on quickly to the limitation, and that's more interesting, actually. there was a joint survey which was conducted by IAF, ILAC, ISO. It was conducted in October 2021, and there were more than 4,000 participants. It was found during this survey that 37% of respondents in some way have experienced audit disruption due to poor internet connection. So, and that's the most common thing, but technology plays an incredible important role for remote assessment activities. Poor internet connection can cause significant problems with video conferencing, facility tours, access to data, and this is something which we as CBs need to ensure that we are discussing with the organization during the planning phase so that the disruption is not there. I'm sorry. On the same side, on-site activities are not limited by technology, but they allow a more immersive experience. The person, you are able to have, meet the person, the ambience, you feel the ambience, you visualize the site, you are able to interact with the staff. So the person-to-person interaction during on-site inspection is very important, and this can never replace what we are doing remotely. And a lot of activities we cannot do remotely. For example, I cannot remotely seal a container. I'm not actually witnessing the stuffing of the container. I would not be comfortable to seal a container until and unless my inspector has been witnessing the whole stuffing. We cannot sample remotely, right? We cannot remotely audit the welding process of a steel fabricator. As mentioned in the report by Ileana, you cannot even perform remote audit for undersea cables, right? You cannot perform inspections where you need to be in a biohazard premises. In halal audit assessment of slaughterhouses, it demands verification of surrounding facility and not just the production line. And this is done to check if there is a possibility of non-halal products in the premises. There are certain questions which are also related to the regulation and the legislative authorities. The government are, the scheme owners for most of the schemes, and sometimes we are solely dependent on them in terms of the acceptance of the remote activities. So if some scheme owner is not accepting it, then we as CABs or conformity assessment bodies, we cannot really qualify a client for remote assessment activities. So that's one of the limitations. Today, drones are performing remote assessment activities, but there are still countries out there which have a very difficult and cumbersome regulation related to safety, which makes it difficult or next to impossible to get necessary approvals and operate remotely. We have also, as we are talking about limitation, I would not like to go in detail, but to just talk about legal issues. Sometimes everyone tries to resonate the remote inspection with the physical inspection. They are not the same. However, we have seen that there are questions asking, the claims or the legal part arising due to the remote inspections. Now, my thought on that would be that each conformity assessment body, you need to have a clear published policy, legal disclaimers. You need to have proper documentation and process. You need to have evidences captured, whether it's video, whether it is high definition pictures, and certain other evidences to avoid future legal disputes and liabilities. There should be a clear difference. First of all, there should be a clear differentiation and understanding what kind of activities can we do remotely and what we cannot do remotely, right? And in certain regions, you also need to look at the overall, government approval or authority, whether they allot you to conduct remote activities or not. At the moment, we don't have a standard in particular for regulating remote inspection remote assessment activities across TIC industry. I'm sorry about that. But a lot of guides I had said earlier, and along with the TIC Council, what they have developed now, it helps in further amplifying our, guides or improvement on conducting the remote activities. We have also witnessed risk assessment approach has not been always followed while conducting remote activities. The decision to conduct a remote inspection should be risk-based, first of all, and this has been also captured very nicely in the paper published by Ileana. Criteria have to be identified, checklist has to be adopted before determining whether an activity can be carried remotely or not. Data security is again a concern in terms of limitation, and we need to ensure that there is no integrity or data loss or data theft. The data is encrypted, and that has to be taken care by the IT. I would like to conclude by saying that so far, no uniform or agreed remote assessment model has been emerged. Every agency, every conformity assessment body have implemented their own approaches. Each one has its own advantages and disadvantages. Although remote inspections may not fully substitute on-site inspection, but they have proven their value and should accordingly remain a tool in the post-pandemic world. And last not the least, as per the survey, which I just mentioned a few minutes back, it was noted that post-pandemic, almost 60% of respondents, they're opting for blended or hybrid inspection. Now, this again is captured in the guide or the paper which Ileana has prepared, and this is going to be the future, which further, gives confidence in conducting remote assessment activities. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Amlesh. You really have touched on many points that were also addressed in our paper. So there is a lot of commonality there in terms of how to approach this activity, which is an evolving activity, and there are really very few hard answers that we can provide on any other topics. But we certainly are trying and addressing them as best we can. And one thing that in the limitations that you didn't mention, but I think that some of our members have found is the willingness of the client to accept this. Sometimes the clients or the customers are a little reluctant to accept remote activities with the perception that it wouldn't be as thorough, it wouldn't be as effective, which should not be the case. If it's not going to be effective, then it shouldn't be carried out. But the point is that there are many situations where it can be just as effective as an on-site assessment. But again, it's a fluid situation, and all the cases are a little different. There aren't any fast and hard rules that we can just write down and accept. Anyway, thank you very much again, and we'll continue with your colleague, Imran, please.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, hello everyone. First and foremost, thank you TIC Council for inviting us to speak on this topic. Ileana, Pia, Giuseppe. Let me start by introducing myself. So I am Senior Product Director of Digital Products and Innovation at Cotecna. Today, the objective of my presentation is to discuss about the use of technology for remote activities. Can we move to the next slide, please? I will start with a story that perhaps would emphasize some of the points that are already been covered earlier about the importance of remote activities. Few months back, I came across a story about a young person in his 20s. He bought an electric vehicle, a two-wheeler. He wanted to play his part in building a greener, safer planet. He was super excited. He bought the two-wheeler at home and plugged it in, started charging. His family was also happy for him. When suddenly, due to a fault in the vehicle, the two-wheeler caught fire and exploded, leaving him and his family injured. Now, this story not only talks about the importance that we play as a TIC industry in ensuring the safety of products, but it also brings to fore an important point around new products and the proliferation of new products and technology. New products and technology are getting launched almost daily. Thanks to the advancement in technology, thanks to the funding these startups receives, thanks to digitalization, reduction in barriers, they are reaching different corners of the world faster than the expertise to do quality control and assurance. Through remote activities, we could maybe make a difference by bringing the global expertise and making it available through technology to different regions where such expertise are maybe not available at that time. This is where we ask the question that how can, let's say, technology assist in remote activities? And to answer that question, let's start with the present day. So today we have internet connection, in some regions good, in some regions not so good, as Kamlesh already talked about. And we have mobile. And on mobile, we have some mobile application using which we do remote activities or remote inspection. For example, at Cotecna, we use many forms of mobile application, but one of the mobile application that we use is OnSite by LibreStream, which we use for remote inspection. Now, these applications have gone better and better in the past few years. The applications allow us to connect to inspection sites even in low bandwidth areas. It allows multiple counterparties and experts to join the conversation, live stream the video, capture screen and do annotation and many more stuff. I believe that as remote activities will increase, technology adoption would increase. And as technology adoption would increase, more investment would go into making the technology better and better. We are already seeing some trends emerge in this direction. Today we use mobile, which is a handheld device. We are seeing the emergence of augmented reality glasses that are replacing slowly the handheld mobile devices. They're not only making the inspection better, as someone pointed out, creating a more immersive experience, but also improving the reducing the friction that the users have. They don't have to carry the mobile device in hand, so they just put the AR glasses and you are good to start the remote activity. But this is what is happening today. Now let's step back and take a maybe a long-term view. No, we don't have any crystal balls over here, but what we do have is we can formulate some hypotheses. So one of the hypotheses is that artificial intelligence, especially computer vision, can be used to further support remote activities. I'll give you an example. You know, through different devices, what we are doing is we are capturing images. These images can be processed by an artificial intelligence engine to say identify objects or maybe flag areas of concerns. As these engines work in coordination with a human, these engines would learn and become better and better. We also see a trend emerging on data acquisition itself. Kamlesh already touched upon some of these points, but I will go much into some details. We are seeing a trend emerge on data acquisition through drones or sensors. We are currently, in fact, ourselves running a pilot where we use drones to acquire data from a big warehouse, then use machine learning to process the image in order to calculate tonnage for stockpiles in a warehouse. We are doing this pilot for past 8 months, and what we notice is that the results are more accurate and more faster. I can think of many use cases for drones and AI. Of course, the regulatory restrictions do remain, but once regulators start understanding the benefit of these technologies, drones and AI can do many things, such as, they can scan the solar farms in large solar farms or wind turbine inspections. They can do it much faster, much better, much accurate than what we have today in practice. We are definitely in early stages when it comes to the use of technology, but the use of technology for remote activities will enable more use cases. And once we gain more confidence, this will open more doors and more use cases for remote activities, creating a virtuous cycle. I will conclude by saying that we don't know the future, what what we do know is that there is tremendous opportunities when it comes to this space, because using remote activities, we can bring global expertise to areas which probably do not have those expertise. We can also combine human intelligence with computer intelligence so that we are able to do quality control, quality assurance much better, much faster. With that, I will conclude my presentation for today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Imran. That was very interesting, and somebody's applauding, so I think we've hit the mark in terms of providing information during this webinar. So we have about 15 minutes left on our hour of this webinar. We received with the registration quite a lot of questions. I would say almost 100, maybe not quite, but definitely about 75 questions that I will try to address with my panelist. I don't know that we have received any more during the webinar itself, but I think there's still the option, if some of you would like to ask questions, there's still the option to do that. So the questions that we received ahead of time when you were registering, I was able to separate them into 4 bins and 4 types of questions. The one that I will start with are the questions on accreditation and regulatory rules, where there were questions about, are there any regulations for remote audit? Do government agencies do this remote assessments, or is only in the government, in the private sector? And what are the attitudes of the regulators and the accreditation bodies on this? So I will say, first of all, that it varies enormously depending on the part of the world you're at. Of course, it's not the same thing. The regulations, if you're in Europe or in the US or in the Middle East or in other parts of Asia, those regulations are sometimes very different. I will say, though, that we are aware that both government agencies and private sector CAPs have undertaken remote assessments with a lot of success. And in terms of accreditation, again, it's very varied. It depends on the accreditation body, and also, of course, depends on the rules that are established in IAF and ILAC. Mostly IAF is the one who has most of the documentation on this. IAF, as was mentioned, does have a number of documents, and they did established a question and answer forum to address all the issues that were coming up during the COVID era. And they are now in the process of looking over, that's IAF, there's a task group, a working group within IAF that's looking at all the documents to see how and if they need to be updated or changed to accommodate in a more certain fashion the remote activities. So let's see. I would ask then our panelists if they want to add anything else to that in terms of the experiences they have had with accreditation bodies and or their regulatory entities that they have to deal with.
Well, I can perhaps start.
Thank you,
So, as already mentioned, so with our guideline, it is in particular important to know what is the basis. So if we have for an audit basis, which is the regulatory requirement, so given by a legislation, so sectoral legislation in Europe, then we need to do it like it is given there. So in particular, so for medical devices, for example, so with a new legislation, so it was not possible to do these remote activities. Yeah, because it is a specific requirement in the legislation, and then it's not possible. Otherwise, if it's possible, then this is done, or the way is given by the regulator. So the regulator needs to provide a specific guideline or interpretation or a kind of an allowance to do so remotely. Yeah. So and then we have accreditations. That's the same thing. It is necessary to have a kind of an improvement, as already mentioned in my presentation, by the accreditation board. So with regard to the COVID situation, yes, it is true. So then these authorities, so notifying authorities, regulators, and accreditation bodies, so gave the way for applying those remote activities in a restricted manner. Yes. Otherwise, the provision of specific goods had not been possible. But as soon as such a situation changed, so then the situation changed too. So that's in more or less a general, yeah, to answer this question generally, but it is always necessary to have a specific view on the situation.
Thank you, Pia. Thank you very much. Imran, you've had some experiences with some regulatory agencies that have been accommodating to remote activities. Do you want to share some of that information?
I think the best person to answer this is on our side is Kamlesh. He interacts with a lot of regulatory bodies. So Kamlesh.
Yes. So in Middle East, when we talk about countries like United Arab Emirates, we have the government agency called as MOIAT, which is Ministry of Industry and Advanced Technology. When we talk about certain accreditation agencies, which is in Saudi, known as Gulf Accreditation Center, GCC Accreditation Center. Now, these kind of institutes, they are accepting and they are conducting remote activities. It is to do with management system audits. It is to do with product certification audits. And also, they are, there are certain witnessing activities which are conducted remotely by them. So yes, it's in certain part of the countries. I think PIA has a different approach. Maybe in Europe we don't have this as a norm, but in Middle East we do have. But then when we talk about certain countries like India, they have an institute, NEBCB. Again, for certain activities or certain accreditation, they accept remote audit, but for certain they do not accept. So, every country, every region would have its own complications, and it's not just about the policy what you develop, but you would also need to rely on the legislations, the regulations, whether they allow or not.
Yes, thank you, Kamlesh. Indeed, the situation is very fluid now. Nowadays, it is fluid even without remote assessments, where the regulations are different in different parts of the world, and even the accreditation, the way the accreditation is done in different parts of the world is different. There's no doubt about it. The fact that there are remote activities now, it's another added layer of complication, and it's complex to see, to determine if it's allowed and if it's a good idea, if it's something that can be actually performed properly, taking into account all the risk. As the paper mentions, it's very important to do a risk analysis for each situation to see if a remote activity is actually beneficial. And again, CAPS have been doing remote assessments for many, many years in areas that are not accessible, in nuclear plants and underwater cable, and just a number of them. So it's in those areas, the regulators and the accreditation bodies accept them. So I guess it's a new situation that has been created by COVID is the one that is bringing all these issues to the forefront. And I think everybody, both regulators, accreditation bodies, scheme owners are trying to work through it and decide what would be best for the future. Okay, the second type of questions that we received ahead of time, I would put them in a bin called best practices. I think we have addressed many of these concerns in our presentation of the three panelists. But for example, one of them would ask how far remote conformity assessment ensures the quality of products, which is inspected where collection of sample and testing is required. As I said, the point of remote activities is that the outcome has to be equivalent. It has to be the same. It is not less quality or less strict or less thorough. It has to be the same. There are just so many techniques that are available to us nowadays that weren't available in the past that make that possible. So I would invite any of our panelists to say any other, make any other comments they would like to in this regard.
Well, if you allow me, then I would like to start.
Yes.
Yes, there are several questions around the point that if the let me say the approach, the techniques used for remote activities are providing the same results. So not only the quality and so on, but also if the techniques are sufficient to do so. Yes, first of all, I would like to mention that it's very important to know that the process of the conformity assessment is the same. So there are not different ways to do so or to do the work. So the techniques are different, yes. And therefore, what I already tried to mention is the planning and the preparation is much more important. So in regard to the staff participating from our side in such remote activities, but also from side of the clients, of the customer. And yes, it is also a question of what type of technique I use. So already mentioned by the others that we have the possibility to use drones. There is somebody going around with a camera or using a camera, so sending papers prior to the assessment. So, or sending also examples taken from the manufacturing process to be also tested. So things like that. It depends on, I think, on the risk analysis we have done prior to this. So what kind of relationship is already there with the client? So I mentioned, so it's a little bit different, certainly if it's a new client or a new product. And yeah, therefore, a concrete answer why a specific audit is done or not done, it always depending on the situation, which is considered prior to do such a remote activity. So
if I may add to what Pia has said, right, and build on top of it, right? I think we are not here saying that remote inspection or remote activities would replace physical inspection or physical activities, right? I mean, I think the message we are trying to say is that it's like another addition, another tool that you have, right? So today we can meet face to face or we can meet virtually. That's what we are doing today, right? So it's another tool. That does not mean that we cannot meet face to face, right? So I think the most important part, at least in today's context to understand, is the risk assessment, right? There are certain high risk, high value goods, right, for which maybe remote activity or remote inspection is not the answer. But that's okay. There are still a huge number of activities and inspections that can fit into this bucket and we can do it. Now, the second is to the question that how do we ensure quality, right? Now, that depends upon the use case, right? So let's say if the use case is to ensure that the inspection is done at the right location, then today mobile applications can provide geotags or geolocation to ensure and cross-verify location, right? If let's say the question is around what I'm seeing is correct, right? Then today, again, there are techniques by which you can look at the surrounding and ensure that you are not shown something which is incorrect or fake, right? So there are different techniques, whether we use mobile application, drones, or complement it with artificial intelligence to read and process the images. The human element is not, at least for today, not going to go away. Technology is going to supplement or complement the human element. You do the risk assessment and then decide based on the regulation whether a remote activity is possible or not.
Indeed, thank you, Imran. Yes, absolutely on target, everything that you mentioned, and the same with Pia. Um, there are some other questions that have been sent on the chat, and I think they all um, um, attempt to ask the same thing. What are the cases when remote activities are proper and when it isn't? It's a case by case. It has, and again, the human element will never be replaced. There are situations where you will need to be in the location. If you have to smell or hear something, if you have to assess the cleanliness of a place or of a situation, there are some things that can't be done remotely, definitely. But there are many that can. So it's a question of taking advantage of the good processes that we have been forced to use during COVID, or increasingly used during COVID to continue activities. There is one question that was sent in the registration that I'd like to address because I think it's a misconception. The question seems to imply that remote activities are less costly for the certifier. I think that's absolutely incorrect. It is not less costly. There is savings on traveling, of course. That's the first thing everybody thinks of, no traveling. But there's so many other aspects of remote activity that need investments, and that it's not true that it is it's cheaper to do remote assessments. There's all the technology, there's a training to the people, the preparation and the risk assessment, I think, is a little more I don't know if the right word, intense, or a little more new, that has to be for previous activities. Things have been done in the past, and there is a rhythm to activities. With these new components, it's different. So just wanted to make sure everybody understands that this is not a cost savings approach at all. So anybody else? I think we have reached our time, and I was wondering if the panelists want to make some last comments before we close the webinar.
Yes, certainly. I can start if you like. Well, I think according to what we received on questions, I think what we need to consider is that this is a new format sometimes, and we need to be used to get used of this format. That's the same thing. I remember when this unannounced audit had been much more focused on medical devices. So that was also something which created in the beginning an uncertainty. And I think it's a little bit similar, perhaps, with such remote activities. So we need to get used of it. We think it's different if we see only via a video somebody or a situation that gives us less insight in situations. But I think we need to gather also experiences to get used to it, and then I think we can manage it. And so, nevertheless, it will never replace on-site things. And as already mentioned, it depends on the situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pia.
Thank you. I have just read few of the questions which have come at the end, but I'm not going to go in detail. But just to conclude, even post-pandemic setting, we do expect remote activities to continue, but it doesn't mean that it can be applicable for all kind of inspections, as again and again mentioned by my colleague. A lot of factors. One of the question is asking about, how to conduct it in the post-pandemic. A lot of factors depend. What is the product in question? How much is the frequency of the shipment? What you're talking about, the inspection? Who is the party involved? Is it a trader? Is it a manufacturer? What kind of ISO system they have in place? What kind of reports they have gone or audit they have done in past? A lot of factors comes into the process of understanding and determining the risk, as mentioned in the paper, to agree whether remotely we can perform or not. And in terms of the question, which is about 360-degree vision, which is missing in remote. Well, we can never have a 360-degree vision in remote audits. All we can do is business continuity. We need to come up with some kind of solution where we are able to derive and meet the critical factors of the shipment or the product in place. So with that, I would love to end my speech. Thank you very much, guys, and it was lovely being a part of this forum.
Thank you, Kamlesh. Well, I think we will now end the webinar. I want to thank very, very much our three panelists for their hard work and their contributions. And I also want to thank especially to all our participants. We've had a very good number of people listening to our webinar. I hope it was enlightening and that you did learn something and that you will go and actually read the TIC Council paper, which would answer a lot of the questions that you may have. Again, thank you very much, and looking forward to continuing the discussion on this brand new activity that we are undertaking in the TIC industry. Thank you very much.
Thank you.